thank you all for joining me. We have a really tremendous panel with a huge range of expertise. I'd like to start from my right. Paolo Roberto Domondon, Chief Program and Policy Officer of Global Fishing Watch. Bora Peterson, the Earth Observation and Satellite Services Specialist at Kongsberg Satellite Service. Mukesh Bhatnagar, Senior Fisheries Expert at the Indian Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Minako Iue, the founder of Sailors for Sea here in Japan. And Kayleigh Levesque, of course, the Associate Deputy Minister of Fisheries and Oceans of Canada. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for those of us who've stuck with us here in this room late into the afternoon. We're going to be talking a bit more about legal reported and regulated fishing in today's session. And this is a problem that goes from the government level, at the international level, to the national level, to the local level, from private sector to public sector. But I'd like to start with you, Kayleigh, for a perspective from Canada, but also a perspective at a national government level. As you are thinking about management of fisheries, about the legal reported regulating fishing problem in Canada, what are the biggest challenges that the Canadian government has identified from your perspective sitting in Canada?
Thanks so much for that, Noah. One of the biggest things we've been grappling with, both domestically and internationally, is we can't make more fish. It is a zero sum, ultimately, in terms of population. So thinking about it from that perspective, how can we look at IUU through a lens of declining fish stocks, marine habitat destruction, tying back to the last panel, how it undermines the livelihoods of legitimate fish harvesters around the globe, and also can be linked to crimes of convergence, such as drugs and firearms trafficking. And for us, thinking about how we manage marine habitats, the serious risks that it poses, not only to ecological security, but also national security and international security, and how IUU ultimately undermines the rules-based order around which global fisheries are managed and predicated, and why I think you'll see all of us here today together.
Yeah, I mean, I came at this from a slightly oblique angle, but what I was getting at really, and to put it more bluntly and journalistically, I mean, sitting in Canada where you are with a president like Donald Trump talking the way he is, the idea of collaborating across borders, when the idea of those borders themselves is now suddenly up for grabs, it seems like a brave new world, not only for geopolitics, but for all kinds of issues, including fisheries. I wonder if you feel the impact.
It's interesting. Fish really don't respect national borders or boundaries. You all know,
carbon emissions.
Much like emissions, exactly. They swim with the current. They follow the tide. And we were talking prior to the panel. They follow where the water temperature is, even in some cases. But what it underscores, actually, the complex nature of the problem is that you cannot go it alone. And that's really been where Canada has focused, whether through bilateral relationships, but also through our regional fish management organizations, the RFMOs. And that's really where we reinforce the rules-based order and work with countries, regardless of the domestic priorities, working together in that managed rules-based approach.
Yeah. Minako, I'd love to turn to you because you've thought a lot about how to drive policy change as well. Sailors for Sea has been really active here in Japan. How do you think about the linkage between the national level and the international level when it comes to policy? How much are Japanese policymakers thinking about fisheries in those terms?
Well, in the ideal life, that I would say that everybody is thinking about it, but in fact, it's very difficult at the moment, and especially that Kayleigh is leading, the Canadian government is now leading the alliance called IUU Fishing Action Alliance, where everybody except the Japan of the G7 countries are already the members. And we are trying to, not the persuade, but recommend the government to join the ASAP in order not to be behind of the trend, and then also that we needed to ally because the ocean is one that we share. But the policymakers having their own difficulties within their jurisdictions or within their territory of what they're looking after. And the fishery agency is always aligned with they needed a very peaceful conversation with the fishery the groups, the particular groups there. And so although the Japanese policy has been changed to the new revised fishery law being implemented in 2020 and then followed by the so-called IUU regulation in 2022. However, the implementation has been very slow, so that we are trying to encourage them to do what we needed to do at the moment.
Brilliant. And Mukesh, just coming back around the loop here. I mean, you've spent a lot of time in international negotiations, trying to navigate these competing concerns at the national level and at the international level. I'm curious from a rapidly growing developing countries perspective. How the Indian government is positioning itself when it comes to achieving legal, reported, and regulated fishing. How does the Indian government express its interests in an international context?
Yes, thanks for inviting me to this panel discussion. Yes, I have been following the negotiations in the WTO for close to 15 years, and one part of the Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies was concluded in June 2022 to prohibit subsidies that contribute to illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing and where the stocks are overfished. That agreement is likely to come into force when 2/3 of the members ratify it. Navigating the challenges from national to international level, in the domestic constituency, the vision and the policy statement of Indian Ministry of Fisheries is that to ensure a sustainable fishing and aspiring, in a blue economy. So we have to fish sustainably. That is the prime vision, policy, and guidance that has been given. The challenges come in implementation, in the sense that majority of Indian fishery is small scale and artisanal, predominantly small. They use invariably vessel size of less than 24-meter length. There will be two components of IUU, in the sense that you have to regulate your own exclusive economic zone to ensure IUU does not happen within your EEZ. And also, if you are a member of an RFMO, if any vessel is engaged or reported to have engaged in IUU, which comes into the IUU listing, then subsidies to such vessels have to stop, in addition to punitive actions as per the national law. The Indian coastal states, which are 9, are already implementing Marine Fishing Regulation Act. So they are responsible for ensuring that the fishermen who have got the license and permit to fish within 12 nautical miles, and if they go beyond 12 nautical miles, they abide by the conditions of those licenses. And a fish ban period of 61 days is scrupulously observed both in the east coast and west coast of Indian Ocean. When it comes to exclusive economic zone, elaborate guidelines are being formulated by Government of India at the federal level to ensure that fishermen will be complying with the fisheries conservation and management measures, and any IUU fishing will have to be dealt with in accordance with the national law. But just to add that in the WTO fisheries subsidies negotiations, as a developing country got 2 years transition period to fully comply. the FAO's International Plan of Action, which was of 2001. So developing countries will get about 2 to 4 years to be fully in compliance with the FAO Plan of Action. But nonetheless, the stated policy of Indian government has that it cannot support any IUU fishing.
Bora, maybe you could give us a window onto how technology can play a role in giving fisheries management agencies, policymakers, even fishermen themselves, fishing folks themselves, the tools to monitor, the tools to better implement some of the policies that were mentioned by our colleagues so far.
Yes, so it's an interesting topic, and I mean, from a technology point of view, it's super cool because we now have the chance to be ahead of the pack. So because today we are using traditional AIS, but if you're familiar with the automatic identification system, it has a lot of failures, meaning that the captain will just put a metal bucket over the transponder, and then, because it's not allowed to turn it off, so they just put a grid over it. It doesn't work. We see that a lot when we do monitoring of fishing fields, that you have two ships side by side. One is with the AIS on, which is seems to be harmless. But when you have two ships side by side, that means that it's most likely ship-to-ship transfer of fish from one vessel to the other. But we are using radar satellites because the reflection back to us, as when we read it, we can distinguish easily between two different ships, both in size and position. So that is very helpful when it comes to the detection of that. And there is a new initiative now in Norway and also in Japan, which is called the VDS. So VDS is basically a version 2.0 of AIS, but now you can have sensors put into, so instead of just reporting your location and speed and destination, now you can put sensors in. Will they do it? I mean, the fishermen, I don't know, 80% will, but you have still the 20% that assuming that the 80-20 rule applies to the fishing fleet as well. You can have sensors on the trawlers and on how much fish they put in the boat, how much they report out. Again, if they follow the rules. But the rules for that, because VDS is it's a new technology and it's not mandatory, and it's like a SOLAS IMO regulation that needs to be in place, and who knows, it could take 10 years before we see that.
Yeah, so yet another sort of enforcement and accountability challenge. I'm curious, Paolo, I mean, Bora mentioned that technology gives us the tools at this stage to be ahead of the pack, to be ahead of the curve of bad actors at sea. But in practice, what are you observing? To what extent? I mean, it's always a bit of a cat and mouse game, right? One strategy gets tried, then they adopt. I'm curious what you're seeing sort of in practice. To what extent is the technology empowering oversight, accountability, regulators to be ahead of the curve? And to what extent are actually bad actors at sea able to outwit and change their tactics? Maybe it has to be something more than putting a bucket over your transponder now, but what are you finding?
I mean, definitely technology catalyzes a lot of things, and we've seen significant adoption from all the governments that we have been closely working with. But I really want to be able to capture also the two big opportunities that my co-panelists have been saying. The first one is really the advancements in technology, right? AI, data fusion, machine learning. Interestingly enough, Global Fishing Watch was started in 2014 at the World Ocean Summit, where three like-minded but a little crazy organizations, namely SkyTruth, Google, and Oceana, sat down and really envisioned how can we actually use technology to advance ocean governance. So there's a lot of traction, there's a lot of opportunities in there. But the other major opportunity is really the political momentum that my other colleagues have mentioned here. And without that one or another, we won't be able to leverage and harness what AI and technology can actually really do. There's significant traction over the last few years and what we've seen, how ocean has suddenly became forefront. The Ocean Climate Nexus, nobody, or maybe a handful of people have only been discussing the importance of ocean during the Paris Agreement. Now we see it a lot in the national determined contributions, the national adaptation plans, all these coalitions that are from colleague from Sailors for the Sea mentioned, the IUU Action Alliance, which Canada is leading us. There's so much of that traction in the CBD, the fisheries subsidies, marine pollution. And if we combine those two big opportunities on technology and political momentum, I think we can actually really do a lot.
I'm curious, from a policymaker perspective, how the technology piece fits in. I mean, it's always a challenge for governments as well, because the technology itself is moving so fast. Getting government up to speed, getting regulators up to speed in any field is tricky. But what have you observed when it comes to technology in fisheries, in oceans management? How do you bring technology into your work?
Fisheries can be very low-tech work, as we all know. Some of it is very paper and pen and somebody out on a boat with a bucket, as you note. But what we've been able to do is really work with some incredible technology that we also have in Canada. Developing dark vessel detection has been one of our big ones, where even if the bucket goes over the transponder, radar sat data is able to be deployed to detect those on water. Also looking at how out in the survey work that's done, the surveillance itself, satellites tracking, the imagery that's being used, and the operations that we conduct. It's not often a case where we have government at the same pace of technology, we'll say, but in this case, our policies have been flexible enough because fisheries is a constantly evolving and active management. It's not a set it and forget it scenario. You are constantly engaged with the fishers, with the science, with governments around the world, and with NGOs in that space too. And for us, that's why we've got sort of a three-pronged strategy around this. There's the governance, we talked about RFMOs and the IUUs, the enforcement, which is obviously the technology, dark vessel detection, being out on the water, but then the partnerships piece, because that's what brings that to life, is how you actually then, you can collect a lot of great data, but what do you do with it? And that's where it really is so meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it's a running theme in the discussions in this room, but connecting different flows of data, different parts of the supply chain. There's actually a lot, as I'm learning today, a lot that's out there and hasn't yet been synthesized or hasn't yet been brought together in a way that fully realizes its potential. So maybe a kind of a hopeful element in this. I'm curious to turn to you again, Minako, because you have done a lot of really concrete work, in particular on the Blue Seafood Guide. I'm interested in, to bring different streams together to create standards that can be applied more widely. Could you tell us a bit more about how, in a practical sense, how you've gone about that, how you've gone about creating a methodology that's bringing together different streams of data and taking different stakeholders into account?
Oh yes, thank you. We found that this sustainable seafood rating program called the Blue Seafood Guide, sampling the United States famous seafood watch by the Monterey Bay Aquarium. We first tried to apply the seafood watch methodology to the Japanese fisheries, but we couldn't do it because there was so much of the data deficiency. And if we apply the seafood watch methodology, everything will be on the red listed, and that shouldn't be happening. So that we needed to have a sort of modified and then applicable to the Japanese fisheries reality. And then that is how that we created the new methodology under the restriction of the GSSR, and then we've been well, watching the MSC standard and the Seafood Watch standard and all sorts of internationally recognized standards to compare with that. And so, and then now we started not only for the national version, but also that we created the area version, like a prefectural version, like a Kyoto prefecture or the Osaka prefecture or the Kyoto prefecture, that because each area has the different conditions and also the different coastal management system and then the quality and the standard as well. So if, for example, the spiny lobster, for example, it's not on the seafood, Blue Seafood Guide national version, because we couldn't see some part of the Japan that we couldn't see the sustainable regulations. However, our MIE version that we listed it on, because that we know the management is very well done there. And so in order to promote those good people and the good fisheries that we really wanted to promote and to support them. However, that we can't restrict, like for example, the Seafood Watch gives us the signal sign, the green, yellow, and then red to restrict and prohibit sometimes to consume. But in Japan, they're thinking about the Japanese delicate mentality and then also the conflicts with this market or the government, so that we just signed and recommend the blue to go, and I just recommend positively, and so that it's recognized as a positive recommendation. And it's been good so far. And then now we are talking with the British Embassy to create the UK version, so that we can support them to export to Japan their sustainable seafood, so that they can differentiate that with the unsustainable products. And then that's the positive way to avoid the IUU products out of this market. And that's what we can do out of the government, non-governmental activities. However, the governmental activities, there are a lot more to do. A lot of the supply chain companies, for example, like a 7-Eleven, that we made the paper that we submitted to the government saying that the supply chain all want to have the stricter regulation altogether, and if it's not mandated, that they can't deal with the price premium that by just one company, so that they want it to be regulated, so that it's equally applied, so that the price premium is not the burden for just one company. Then the consumer should understand that everybody has to follow the one guideline. And so there's a lot to do, and we need to collaborate with the different countries. Like in Canada is now leading the IUU Action Alliance, and we need to learn from the international conversations. Like this Economists World Ocean Summit is one of the very good example that this is the first session that the World Ocean Summit that is held in Japan, which means that we have the simultaneous to English-Japanese, so there's a rare opportunity for everybody in Japan to learn from the international people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked. Many of you have talked about regulation in different respects, about enforcement, and it seems to me that there are sort of two sides to this problem. One is a kind of enforcement capacity problem. I mean, who is actually accountable for enforcing? How do you do it across a fragmented supply chain, across a fragmented international system? But a second is a kind of the content of the regulation itself. Is the regulation itself adequate? Does it meet the needs of, or the realities of the modern day ecosystem, the modern day markets? So I'm curious how you all think about that. I mean, to what extent is it a problem of the regulations itself not being adequate, or to what extent is it a problem of regulation not being adequately enforced?
I think you have put a very, very valid question. When it comes to implementation, there are challenges. I think regulations are in place. We take the example of India. So there are enough provisions to deal with unregulated fishing or unreported fishing, or non-compliance with the terms of under which a particular fishing permit has been granted. So how it's being tackled, just coming back to your previous question of infusing technology. So in India, as more organizations doing with satellites, so we have also, through our indigenously developed satellite system developed by Indian Space Research Organization, transponders have been developed, and then we are installing vessel monitoring system on about 200,000 fishing vessels, both motorized and mechanized, which will ensure tracking of those vessels, their activities, and if they enter into any other territory which they are not supposed to be, they will be alerted. And at no point of time their systems or transporters have to be switched off, which will have to be ensured by the Indian Coast Guards and other monitoring organizations. And the implementation challenges are that proper stock reporting, because IUU you says unreported. So whether the catch is being properly reported, that's a requirement which traditional artisanal and small scale fishermen find it challenging. But there also what India is contemplating under a scheme called PMMSY, Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana. That's a Hindi word. Acronym is PMMSY, which was launched in 2020. It's an ambitious program to upgrade Indian fisheries and also to modernize, increase production, as well as doing sustainable fishing. So under that, 3,000 Friends of the Ocean, we call Sagar Mitra, Friends of Ocean, are already having got started, engaging 3,000 youth, properly trained, who will be working with the community, fishing community, to educate them and also to ensure proper catch reporting, and also educating them on ensuring following the fisheries conservation management measures. So those are the steps which Indian government is contemplating and in a policy mode and a mission mode. We are also at part of that component of that mission is also online eco-labeling and also infusing technology for traceability. We have been following the catch reporting mechanism of EU, Japan, and the US, whereby the Indian agency of MPDA, Marine Products Export Development Authority, MPEDA, that is ensuring catch certification of Indian marine exports which go to the EU and which go to Japan, where Japan has prescribed a catch certification documentation scheme, and to the US seafood import monitoring program. So that agency is responsible for ensuring that marine exports which are destined to these countries follow the catch certification requirement and traceability is ensured. But again, these measures were driven by the demands of importing countries.
Right.
Now, it's the challenges for investing more, putting resources in it, and collaborating with the technical know-how from others for the government to really implement and ensure traceability of marine capture.
I'd like to hear a little bit of your perspective, Kele, from across the oceans, as it were. I mean, how do you see this? You're sitting in a policy-making role, in an enforcement role, and to some extent, do you have the tools the policy tools, the regulatory tools, the legal tools, to do what you know you need to do?
It's an excellent question and an existential one for policymakers, to be very clear. But for us, I think domestically we have a whole set of regulations, rules, our Fisheries Act that governs it all. But then internationally, we keep coming back, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but the RFMOs are really where we see that. Because as I said, it is dynamic, and the RFMOs really allow us to set those legally binding international commitments that then countries can make their own regulations against. So it maintains that common, as opposed to lowering a lowest common denominator, it elevates the baseline against which then countries can make their own regulations, their domestic context can apply. And I think we have Some of the tools on the enforcement side, I have a very unique dual mandate of both policymaking and an enforcement body within Fisheries and Oceans in Canada. We actually can do things like a joint analytical cell where we have partners sitting not only here but in the room, but also the ability to do activities such as high seas boarding, how we can work together on joint sustainable management of stocks. These are not mutually exclusive. Often people look at discrete, this is a security issue, this is a safety issue, oh, and this is a policy one. And in fisheries, you can actually do it all together. And the RFMOs are the place where we can really advance that.
Right. If I can also just add, coming from the civil society, I mean, you really need to have both, right? The policy in itself and the implementation. I mean, it's such a wicked issue that supporting coastal states, flag states, port states, and their responsibilities. I mean, take, for example, the coastal states, right? One of the most hard and challenging, but very important responsibilities to manage their own exclusive economic zones. And it's primarily important in geographies where the size of the ocean is exponentially larger than the landmass, or in regions where there's very limited capacity to be able to do this well. So they definitely need to be able to be supported through the use of technology. I mean, with Global Fishing Watch, and we've worked with Canada on this, I mean, we've actively, routinely monitored over 30 million square kilometers. And we've seen the uptick of technology use of these governments. In 2022, we were able to support governments taking actions on 4 vessels using this robust technology. The last 18 months, I think we've, and I have to get my team to verify this, I think we've helped governments take actions on over about 700 to 800 vessels. And this is a range of actions from inspections, investigations, legal penalties, putting in the IUU list. I mean, there's so much opportunity, but it's both the policies and the implementation. Even if the RFMOs have the most robust policy, it takes a long time. And I'm in support of RFMOs. But these are government also bodies, and it takes a lot of consensus building amongst themselves.
Wonderful. I'd like to turn things over to the audience for questions, if anyone has any. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left at the very back.
Thank you very much, Jörn Schmidt, WorldFish. This is a really interesting session, and I have one very small comment, and the small comment is on, we're always talking about IUU as if it is one, where I think it is useful to actually split it into, what is the illegal, what is the underreported, and what is the unregulated part of it. So I think that your response and your intervention kind of already took that, and looked at it a little bit more differentiated, but I think it is useful to do that. And the second one is, a little bit more elaborated, is a lot of the solutions that you were presenting, of course, are for kind of the bigger industrial fleets. I mean, you have the satellites, you have, Global Fishing Watch that is relying on AIS and other systems. But about 37 million tons, well, that's actually marine and freshwater. But a large part of that is realized by small-scale fisheries, which is data deficient in many, many respects. So it would be interesting, and we're working as WorldFish, we're working, for example, on identifying ways of working with the fishers and the communities to actually collect the data, and how the data feeds back into the management, working with the government. And I think that model is interesting because it relies very much on the contribution of the fisher themselves. And that goes back to the, to your work in the arena you're working in fostering more industry science partnerships. I think in a lot of these areas where you said, okay, so there's a lot of illegal activities and they're just putting a bucket over the transponder, and then you can't really see where they are. There's a reason why they do that, obviously. I mean, some is probably just criminal activity, but that's, I think, a relatively small part. A lot of that is because it's just human behavior, and they would probably comply more if they would be involved in the management and in the data collection, and they would see that there's a benefit of being involved. And I think this is, in both sides, kind of more the industrialized industry partnerships, industry science partnerships, and then the other one on small-scale fisheries in relation to, being able to collect the data and feed that into the system together with the other data that is available. Thank you.
Any thoughts on the sort of industrial scale versus small scale dynamic?
I can take it briefly as well, if somebody wants.
After you.
So, I mean, first, just a recognition that the industrial commercial fishing vessels is probably still one of the major threats to ocean existence. But at the same time, I mean, WorldFish is doing good work with PECAs, is that right? Sort of like you have like a system, protected seas have their M2. We're now starting to take daily optical imagery of all the coastal lines globally and being able to fuse that with the other data sets of the organization. I come from a small-scale fisheries background, so I did 10 years of that, and I really have like vested interest to actually make this work. But at the same time, your behavior economics and your behavior strategies is one of the many sort of like pieces, right, for us to be able to address this. And just your comment on illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. Of course, there's 3 different buckets, and we can all separate that together. But it's a similar one that we've seen in Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, right? We all talk about 30 by 30. That's one of like 20 targets, right? But there's significant political momentum, and sometimes you just really have to latch on to it.
Minako, I saw you.
Yes.
Both of you. Let's start with you, Minako, and we'll come back down.
Okay. Now, I was just quickly thank you very much for your comment. That I've been always thinking about that the big difference between the pelagic fisheries and the coastal fisheries, because it's entirely different issues and the challenges are different. And the pelagic fisheries, they've been always like under the Global Fishing Watch with the VMS and then vessel monitoring and the AIS and then also the satellite systems, all kind of high-tech, looked after kind of fisheries, and then it's all registered, and then the government is very strict about that. Well, on the other hand, coastal fisheries, they're very much sort of locally done, and then it's very like, as you, Kylie, said, that it's a paper and pen kind of the management, so that there's a huge difference, and then probably we needed to discuss separately about those. But I appreciate that the Global Fishing Watch was launched at the Lisbon World Ocean Summit in 2015, I guess? 14, yes, and I was there. And then I had to wait until 2018 until the Japanese government followed, so that it took 4 years for the Japanese government to catch up. So that I really recommend, and thank you very much for joining us. And I think it's really important to listen to the latest information and discuss about it together.
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful to see initiatives that started here blossoming into speakers on stage, into real change out in the world. Mukesh, you wanted to chime in as well.
Yeah, to the observations of the distinguished speaker on small scale vis-a-vis industrial, the extent of IUU fishing, these have been estimated in different researches. 20 billion or so many million tons, But where does it actually happen? That's a big thing. Whether it happens in West African waters or Western Pacific, wherever. But whether it is indulged into by industrial fishing fleets or whether this cannot happen by small-scale fishermen because they fish close to the shore. So where does the real problem lie of IUU fishing? That has to be, that we'll have to really crystallize. Breaking down of IUU, you're right, but when we discussed these concepts during the WTO negotiations, many members were not willing to break it down. They say it is a single concept, IUU, paragraph 3 of IPO, IUU, everything, and then you can't. So, for example, unregulated happens when you are not following the conservation and management measures. Unreported, if a small fisherman, if not able to report its fish catch, can be considered to have indulged in unreported fishing, and it can be ascribed to IUU, and you will be expected to stop giving subsidies to it. So now we'll have to see where to draw the line and how also to keep the interest of small fishermen, that they should not be subjected to harsh enforcement of FAO, IPO, IUU. This is what will have to be seen.
This is a really fascinating discussion. I think we could have probably a whole additional panel on exactly this distinction and how to navigate it. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and we've got one more session here, so I'll wrap things up. Please give a big round of applause to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.